And that's one reason why it was really difficult to find aircraft wreckage and other informative information. So it required our SREs to then come up with different ways of going through the sediments, because as we're going down, we're getting into heavier and heavier clays. So because of that, and also the issue of, well, where do I screen all the dirt that I'm moving if I'm in now this ravine that has a very small space? We had to move down slope, which is actually to the north. So you're like, why'd you do that? Now you're making me stand on my head to see this map. So we actually created chutes. So to move as much sediment as possible, we created these long tube chutes that then went to a collection point where then we could start that bucket line, because we couldn't have a 200-person bucket line. That's just not plausible. And we also needed to think about safety. So that's where we actually also employed at this JFA, we employed water screening. And yes, my accent comes in when I say that, no matter what I do, so sorry. But what that means is that we are, instead of sitting there sifting with our hands and what we call dry screening, we're actually using water to help break up these clay sediments. And what we do is both low pressure or high pressure, depending on the toughness of the clay. And in this case is that we employed high pressure wet screening, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So here is taking a step back, because I told you about the land use. You're like, oh, you guys created this awesome dam. This looks great. Is that on this JFA is that they decided between the JFAs to establish a fish pond on the site as well. So we had to contend with that. But the fish pond also helped us because it actually created a little pond that we could draw water from. And we got permission to do that, as well as pulling from the intermittent stream that we also dammed to collect water, and then used several water pump generators to pump the water from those areas to a high pressure wet screening operation. So by the 6th JFA, you're like, well, what did you find? You guys are not telling me what I found. I'll get to that. I will, I promise. Moving to the 7th JFA, you can get a bit of extent of our excavation. So these are our overall photos. So we have now fully excavated everything upslope into the ravine. We have covered most of the western portion of the site. We've got most of the ravine, and at this point we're looking at, okay, where do we go next? And so a lot of our efforts focused on the base of the ravine, which is the head of the ravine and that intermittent stream bed. So those types of locations are usually really good for pooling of materials. So moving into the 8th JFA, that final JFA, showing you pictures of, again, our sediment transport. This is all of this sediment at this point is in high pressured wet screening. So this is what we always put it on a platform and have basically fire hoses that run through the top. And that then is manned where we can run a lot more sediments much faster, and then it cleans off anything that we are looking for, like aircraft wreckage material evidence. Here you get a sense of how much that area has been cleared off. So the results of all of these excavations. So all of the black dots you see are material evidence. All of the green dots are life support equipment. Some important finds that we did find is that, and kind of just showing you the variety, is you have your standard military issued buttons. We have grommets, boot eyelets. We also recovered the jungle boot webbing, the wire mesh webbing. We had several pieces of watch band and watch backs and the wristbands of the Psycho watches. One of the more interesting and also informative pieces is this, because this is a Vietnam Army, so ARVON military insignia. Remember, there was 2 Vietnamese on board. And so that actually helps build the case, okay, we're in the right spot. And then we found possible osseous. And you're like, oh, that's great. Remember we mentioned that pig? We also found more of the pig, which was very, very disappointing because we got super excited because this was found on the 6th JFA, and you're like, okay, we got all of this material evidence. We got all of this life support. We got diagnostic aircraft, like we have everything to say we are in the right spot. And sadly, the only osseous we had that we recovered came back as non-human. And we, at this point, where else do we go? Because you look at this map and you saw where we started, and we have now thoroughly excavated everything that we deemed where materials would be transported. Where else do we go? Because the stream bed is now completely excavated, the hillside's completely excavated. And so at the end of this JFA, we deemed that we have reached our archaeological limits. We're not finding anything else. Everything we have expanded beyond where evidence was, all we're finding is really small bomb fragmentation. And so we were kind of at a loss there. So a couple of things to mention to kind of finish up today. I mentioned, well, how do I know that that's pig bone? And where do I learn that? Is that particularly in Vietnam, we conduct joint field activities or field forensic reviews at the time of the JFAs. And so all of the possible osseous was actually eliminated from being evidence at the end of the JFA because it was, to our scientists, was very clearly non-human bone. The other thing we have done is that we have established the Vietnam Identification Project. Most of you that came last year met Dr. Nicolette Parr, who is the project lead. So she is a dedicated analyst within the laboratory to Vietnam. All of us work cases that come in, but having a dedicated project lead helps us with the more complicated scenarios. The other thing we do is that we are continually looking at ways to advance and innovate to advance accounting efforts. So a couple of the initiatives that we are doing in the laboratory are stable isotope analysis. That's something we do in-house, and we're constantly building that. That helps us with human, non-human bone identification now. We're bringing that online. That's something that is, if you're talking about comparing DNA to that, you're very quickly can identify, okay, this is non-human bone. We are also using stable isotope analysis for a country, a home of origin, kind of thinking about 50 years ago, we have very different diets, and so we can determine, okay, this person's more likely Southeast Asian versus from the US, based on stable isotopes. And then the last part of the stable isotopes, we're actually bringing oxygen online to determine that home of origin. So where in the United States? And we've actually used this as a proof of concept for a Vietnam case a few years ago, where we can actually highlight in a particular region of the country where someone could be from. The other thing that we are doing with our partners at AFDL, the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory, is the use of SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms. Yes, a nice mouthful. Now you know why it's called SNPs on the board. But SNPs allows us to use nuclear DNA that we couldn't do in a lot of cases but also allows us to expand our family of references we draw from. So a lot of our cases where we might have a paternal niece, we couldn't use them as a reference. With SNPs, we're able to use them as a reference. So kind of increasing that pool. The other thing, we're working with our partners at the University of Central Florida on laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy. You're like, well, now another big mouthful. But LIBS is actually, it looks like a little pointer like this, and you can shoot the bone and get its chemical elemental breakdown, and it helps segregate remains from commingled assemblages, mixed up assemblages, because you have a unique elemental signature that's unique to you and someone else has a different one. We're actually focusing this on our underwater sites because we talk about expanding the scope of the underwater recoveries within Vietnam. This is something that's really going to be helpful with those multi-person losses. The last thing that we're also working on is data analytics. And you're like, another big word? Come on. But with data analytics is looking at big data sets. One of the challenges that we have, particularly with Vietnam, is digging at the right time of the year at a particular location. So right now we're using all of our identification data. When did we recover evidence? When's the most that we've excavated a site, and combining that with climatic data. So looking at these patterns in data to then help us better inform our recovery efforts. So that way we're making sure that we have the greatest success in recovery for that purpose. So with that, some good news. So this past FY, we have identified 4 first-time identifications for the Vietnam War, and also 7 additional portions of remains, which means that just more pieces of someone that has been previously resolved, which unfortunately is something that is common in our business.